A young man in a navy shirt stands in an archive surrounded by specimen drawers. He holds a mobile phone.
Hello everybody, thank you so much for joining us and welcome back to Season 2 of Hidden Treasures, the live show where we take you behind the scenes of the Natural History Museum here in London. As always, I'm your host Conor and I'll be exploring the collections with you. And today we're coming to you live from the mollusk collection, which is actually one of the oldest collection areas we've explored in all of Hidden Treasures, so I'm super excited to get stuck in. Now, if you've seen this show before, you'll know how it works, but as a refresher, we're live for the next half an hour, and this show is for you. So if there are any specific specimens or cabinets or drawers that you want a closer look at, that you want to look inside, I'm surrounded by some really cool looking cabinets.
Black text on a yellow rectangle reads, "Send in your questions or tell us what you'd like to see."
That's totally up for you to suggest in our live chat box. I've got my phone on me, so I'm keeping track of all of your suggestions that come through, but make sure you get them in nice and early so we can come to as many as we've got time for today. And as always, every week we are also joined by a museum expert scientist. Now today, we're joining Jon Ablett, who is the senior curator in charge of the mollusk collection here at the museum. So if you have questions for Jon, please pop those in the chat box too. Once again, nice and early so we can come to as many as we've got time for. And also make sure you stick around to the end of today's episode, in which we'll be revealing where we're heading in next week's episode of Hidden Treasures, because as you probably know, if you've been watching along with this season, we're coming to you live every single Tuesday at the same time, 12:30 p.m. British Summer Time. So make sure you stick around to the end to find out where we're going in next week's episode. And just before we get started, I want to let you know that we are in a live working space. There are also some groundworks going on outside the museum for the Urban Nature Project currently as well. So if you hear any rumbling, any heavy machinery, that's what you're hearing. Part of the fun of being live. But for now, let's go and meet Jon and check out the collection. So if you want to follow me around into the rest of the collection.
Conor turns a corner into a laboratory and meets Jon. Jon wears a white t-shirt, jeans and glasses.
Hey Jon.
Hi, how's it going?
Yeah, not too bad. How are you doing?
Yeah, pretty good.
Excellent. So thank you so much for letting us come down and explore this whole area of the museum with you. I'd love to find out what it is that you do. What's your day-to-day here?
So, like I said, I'm one of the curators in the mollusca section. There's 3 of us in total, and we look after an estimated 8 million specimens. So either dry shells or whole animals preserved in liquid. And I always tell people that my job as a curator is a bit like being a librarian. But instead of looking after books, I look after preserved animals.
Right.
Just like a librarian, we want to keep them in order so that anytime any of the scientists, either inside the museum or from anywhere around the world, need to find that one special snail, they know exactly where to look.
So you have track of where everything is in here, right?
Yeah, it's not just in here, but there's a lot of it.
And what's your kind of like day-to-day like? So obviously you've mentioned there might be research coming in to look at things, but what kind of other things you get up to on like a day-to-day?
Yeah, I mean, external research is a huge part of my job and something I really love doing. So, you know, people coming in and answering inquiries, but of course London's a very expensive place to visit.
Yes.
We have a worldwide collection, so often we deal sort of remotely with emails, phones, letters. Today, so these are real things that I have to do. A gentleman from Vietnam sent me back some tissue samples that I lent him.
Jon steps forward to a blue desk, covered with different specimens, and picks up a plastic bag containing 4 small clear tubes. He shows it to Conor.
Right, okay.
So he was using these to extract DNA.
Yeah.
And he sent them back. And
They're tiny.
They're tiny,
Yeah.
So that's going back in the collection. A gentleman from Australia asked me my opinion on these. These are some old snails.
Jon picks up a small open red box. He takes out a small clear rectangular box and places it beside the red box on the table.
Collected in described in 1852. Right. They're from New Zealand. So he was asking about the history of these. If we had, I'm going to take some images for him of the features he's interested in.
Yeah.
And then another colleague of mine, some French and Australian, we're working on a project looking at Guy Coburn Robson, who is one of the people that did my job in the 1920s and 30s.
Oh, cool.
So I was searching out a scrap of his handwriting, and I found this in a handwriting book this morning when I first got in.
Using his pinky finger, Jon points at the piece of paper ripped out from the handwriting book.
This is a curator I love. I have real affinity, not just because he did the same job as me, but he had pretty terrible handwriting. So that's what I've been doing so far this morning.
Amazing. That's super cool, and I'd love to get into. We're surrounded by loads of really cool specimens, so we'd love to get into more of those. First up, I believe you have a mystery specimen for us that some of our viewers may have already seen on our communities online.
They walk over to a brown desk.
So we've got that set up here in the visualizer.
A white visualizer shines a bright light onto the mystery specimen below.
So we'll probably cut to this right now so people can have a good look.
The visualizer camera zooms in and enhances the image of the mystery specimen. Two thin, pointed, slightly curved pieces of exoskeleton rest on a black rectangle. A longer, thin, pointed, slightly curved piece of exoskeleton rests below the rectangle.
We've already had a few guesses in from our audience online of what it could be. Now, don't reveal what it is because we'll come to it at the end of the show. But I just wanted to let you know what some people have guessed. Someone thinks it could be a squid. Okay.
Nice.
Someone thinks it could be a tusk shell.
Ooh, good guess.
Okay.
The camera returns to the pair. Connor looks at his phone.
And then also we've had toothpick of a T-Rex.
That's my fave.
Not quite a mollusk, but I think it's a great guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Excellent. We've actually already had a question in already from James, who's asking, what is a mollusk? That's a very good question, I think.
Yeah, so mollusks are a really diverse group of animals. There's been a long record of them, either the fossil record, and because they've been around for such long, they're diversified to lots of different body forms. But the types of animals that people would be very familiar with are slugs and snails that you might find in their garden.
Yes.
They're mollusks. Sea slugs, sea snails, that live in the sea, obviously.
Yeah.
Clams, mussels, and oysters, bivalves as we call them, things that have two shells. Many people eat these species, or some of them. And then the cephalopods, so squid, octopus, cuttlefish, and their relative.
Wow.
And despite, you've got something like...
Very different.
You've got a giant squid, you've got a garden snail. They all have some features in common. One of those being a calcium-based shell.
Right.
So if you ever seen a cuttlebone in a budgie cage, that's the internal shell of a cuttlefish.
Oh, okay.
And
that's
squid
like a shell,
it's a shell,
inside.
an internal. So through evolution, they've reduced in size.
Okay.
So they don't have that protective element that we see in snails. Or the nautilus, which is the only cephalopod to have an external shell.
Yeah.
So they have more of a role in structure and buoyancy.
That's like the one that looks a bit like a cinnamon roll, right?
Yeah, perfect.
Like
Great
an
description.
extinct ammonite kind of thing.
Yes, they're not actually related to ammonites directly, but they very similar form.
Okay, cool. Excellent. So I think it'd be great to have a look at some of those different mollusks, because I know you've got a selection of different kind of specimens here. Can we look at, I'll let you choose, maybe a squid, snail.
Okay.
What do you want to start off with?
So I'm going to go with octopus.
Excellent.
They move over to a black countertop. John opens a clear jar with an octopus preserved in clear spirit. He puts on a blue latex glove.
And everyone watching along, make sure to submit your questions through to John. And if there's any specific mollusks that you'd like to see while we're here, let us know in the chat and we'll get to as many as we've got time for.
So this is a common octopus.
John submerges his gloved hand into the jar and carefully takes out the octopus.
I'm just going to lift it up
Put that there.
to here.
The camera slowly zooms in on the grey octopus with curled up tentacles resting in John's gloved hand.
And what I love about lots of the specimens are not just the actual animals themselves, which are of course wondrous, but some of the stories that go with them, the historical characters, the expeditions that are associated with them.
Yeah.
And this little one was collected by Charles Darwin, the man himself,
Wow.
in 1831 on his Beagle voyage. And it was one of the first things he collected. And we know this because we have copies of his notes, his journals, and obviously the Captain Fitzroy's journals. And this was collected in Cape Verde, and one of the first stops, if not the first stop. And we also know from Darwin's, and actually from Fitzroy's notes, that Darwin had never seen a live octopus. And when he collected this, he really enjoyed the way it moved around the pools. And he actually kept it alive for a little while in his cabin to observe it.
It is such a strange creature to us as humans. It looks so different to what we kind of recognise. It's just so, it looks a bit alien, really.
Definitely. I mean, things like the film Arrival, I don't know if you saw that a few years ago. When I saw those aliens, I was like, oh my goodness, they are squid.
Yeah.
And I think, if you think about the name, so cephalopod means head, foot.
Okay.
Because you've got basically a head and then attached to the feet.
Yeah.
Because in these, I guess it's a bit like us having our head in the middle of our body. You've got this bit here, the mantle, where all the organs are.
John points to the different parts on the octopus's body.
Then you've got the head, to the eyes and the brain, and then you've got, if not the feet, the arms, poda, Latin for feet, but you've got the arms, the way it manoeuvres its way around. So they are literally a kind of topsy-turvy animal.
Yeah. And so, and just going back, because I mean, I kind of glossed over it, but this was the specimen that was found on the voyage of the Beagle, and so Darwin would have handled this animal when it was alive, and now you're holding this now. Does it feel like you're part of like a history here at the museum working?
Definitely. I mean, I love the way I think about my role is when I retire, hopefully a few more years, then, you know, I've played a part in making the collections better, adding new material, re-identifying material, keeping it in a better state. And I love the fact that there were people doing that before me, and there'll be people doing that after me. And, you know, maybe in 100 years, people will be talking about my terrible handwriting, or why did he say it was this species? It's obviously
it's one of my favourite curators, because they've also got bad handwriting.
Exactly. I'd like to be in that club, please. And yeah, it's a real honour and a privilege to know that it's just a temporary custodianship of this, making these available for a worldwide scientific and public audience.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Wow,
and you can see,
incredible.
For example, people are often surprised that we kind of use the specimens. You know, they're not just for display. You can see someone's cut it open to remove the mouth parts. Yeah. They've even dissected the mantle.
What does a mouth part of an octopus look like?
Well, I don't have an octopus for a mouth part of an octopus, but I have a mouth part of a squid.
Jon carefully lowers the octopus back into the jar.
Okay, so it would be great to have a look at that as well.
It's a big one. It's slightly bigger than that. It definitely doesn't come from this species. So let's have a look in this one.
Let's have a look.
So this
wow,
is the mouth parts.
That's massive.
From a colossal squid.
Jon slides over another large, elongated clear jar filled with parts of a squid's body preserved in clear spirit. He takes out the dark body parts, inserts them together, and holds it up.
So there is a species called the colossal squid. They only live in Antarctic waters.
Yeah.
We've never found a fully grown one. They found kind of sub-adult juveniles of around 9 meters. And scientists kind of argue about how big they get, but they could get to between, I don't know, 12 to 18 meters isn't like an out-of-the-world estimate. 18, some people think is too large, but that's kind of what...
18 metres, how long, is that as long as a football pitch, or is that bigger? I wonder.
You're asking the wrong person.
Yeah, it's very big.
It's longer than a double-decker bus.
Okay, right, yeah, that's huge.
So giant squid, which are another species, that we found adults of those, and the females get to about 12 metres, the males about 10, but we think these get bigger. If they don't get bigger, they're definitely bulkier. They have a much bigger body mass. Right. But they have a very large beak, and all cephalopods have a beak like this. Obviously, different sizes. Smaller ones have a much smaller one. And you can see they're called a beak because I think they look a bit like a parrot's beak.
It does. I'm just like transfixed by this because it's kind of terrifying to look at. It is like a huge parrot's beak, or it's like a dinosaur, but it's dinosaur size, like a triceratops or something that we've seen in previous episodes of Hidden Treasures. It's huge.
Yeah, and this this one actually came from the stomach of a sperm whale. Because sperm whales are about the only thing big enough to eat giant squid and colossal squid.
Right.
And in the past, when whaling was common, they'd often put scientists on board who'd go through the stomach contents, pull out the bits. And in fact, the first colossal squid remains. It was described from a partially digested specimen removed from a sperm whale stomach, actually from our man, Mr. Robson, whose terrible handwriting we saw earlier. The circle is now complete. But yeah, so a lot of our work on early deep sea cephalopods was done on this kind of half regurgitated, half chewed stomach contents.
That is incredible.
And these are incredibly sharp. They're actually 100 times sharper at the tip than the base, and they have to do that to break through any of the tissue.
Jon demonstrates the squid's jaw movement.
And what would they eat with these beaks?
So we don't really know what colossal squid eat.
Right.
There's very little work, but we think due to their mass and the way we think they move through the water, they're probably opportunistic hunters, sort of grabbing big fish, maybe big squid that come past them, but they're not very gainly, they're not very bullet-like. You know,
right.
They're probably, ambush predators, as we say.
Right, got it. That is so cool. Wow. We've got loads and loads of questions coming through now. Where to begin, actually? So, while we're talking about this, colossal squid, Emma's asked, what's the largest and smallest mollusk that you have in the collection?
Jon gently returns the squid jaw parts to the jar and takes off his latex glove.
Okay, I haven't brought it with me.
That's all right.
But this is a model.
He grabs a stuffed toy squid from a table behind Conor.
Based on our Archie of a giant squid. So we have an 8.62 metre giant squid in the basement, which is available, you can see on our Behind the Scenes Spirit tours.
Yes.
Jon holds up the 2 long tentacles of the squid, followed by the 8 short arms. He then points to the different body parts.
And you can see most of its length is made up from the tentacles.
Yeah.
And they have 2 long tentacles and then 8 shorter arms.
Yeah.
And then you can see the mantle here and the eyes here. But yeah, that's the largest that we have in the collection.
Yeah.
The smallest, I was thinking about this. So the smallest snail ever found was discovered only last year, and it was 0.6 millimetres in diameter.
Jon picks up the clear tube containing the specimen and moves over to the visualizer.
Okay, this is so small, I'm not actually sure we'll be able to see it. So I'm so terrified of losing it.
Yeah, let's keep it in.
The dot.
Let's zoom that out a bit.
Okay.
He places the specimen under the visualizer camera and zooms in. Inside the tube, a tiny, clear, capsule-like snail shell rests between the 2 white cotton balls.
Okay, if you can zoom there, can you see this? I think this is the smallest one we have in the collection.
Right, so in the bottom corner there. That is tiny.
It's about the size of a grain of sand.
Yeah.
So the one found was slightly smaller than this, but this is Angustapilla. And this came from a limestone cave in Vietnam. It was actually described by the same people that he discovered these other small ones. And yeah, they found in sort of limestone cave deposits. And the only way you are going to find them is by sort of sieving through the dirt that you get in these caves.
Right.
And yeah, amazingly tiny.
How are they going to... So...
The camera returns to the pair.
It's so small. So you sieve through the dirt,
yep.
And then you must have like a microscope trained on all of those grains that are coming through.
I mean, when you're doing work like this, you get this kind of molluscan sixth sense. So
yeah.
I haven't collected these, but I've collected micromolluscs that occur on limestone cliffs, things like that. And it's like those magic eye pictures you used to get in the 90s. You kind of stare at this limestone cliff, and slowly your eyes just kind of get trained on these very small things, and you get a pin and you collect them off with that. It's quite satisfying work.
That is incredible. Well, thank you so much, Emma, for that question. That was a great one. We've got a fun question here from James. What's the plural of octopus? Because there's been so many options thrown about from an expert.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of sort of controversy because it depends if it's a Latin or Greek. Mm-hmm. And then the word octopus is a Latinized Greek word. So if you're going to go letter of the law, it's octopuses.
Okay.
It's the plural. Octopodes is acceptable.
Octopodes.
Yeah.
So octopi is out.
Octopi is
out. That's fake.
But yeah, but octopus is what I use.
Okay, all right, fantastic. Well, there you go. Thank you so much, James, for that question. And then we've got quite a lot of questions coming through from Maximilian and one from Eileen about what kind of mollusks we can find in the UK and are they endangered at all in the UK as well?
Jon quickly glances around the laboratory.
John, I thought I brought a little sheet with me, but maybe I didn't. So there's about 100 species of terrestrial snail.
Yeah.
Far more than most people realise that exist in this country, and there's about 5 or 6 of those are kind of what we call hothouse aliens. So you're only going to find them in a greenhouse or a garden centre. They're kind of tropical, not quite pests, but visitors that won't survive in your garden, but they might survive in a greenhouse or a conservatory or a garden centre. But about 100, let's say. Most of those are actually not rare, not endangered. A few of them, things like the Roman snail, Helix pomatia, they're restricted. You shouldn't touch them if you find them. They're the large edible snail that they eat in traditional, kind of, if you think of the traditional French restaurant that you pull them out, the escargot snail.
Yeah.
And there's a few other wetland species which are rare-ish or locally rare because they only exist in sort of small drainage areas, and often these kind of low sort of wetland areas are at risk of drainage. When you change of land use, for example, building roads or building houses. But most of our land snail fauna is actually kind of a subset of the European fauna. So Ice Age wiped out and then everything kind of recolonised afterwards. So we don't have any endemics, we don't have anything that's only found in this country. That's for the terrestrial snails.
Yes.
I don't do things in the sea. But yeah.
That's great. I think it would be great to have a look at more snails because we've had a look at the cephalopods. I mean, and they're fascinating, but I would love to look at some snails. Although I have just noticed that you've brought out this print here.
Conor points to a picture on a small brown desk. They walk over to the desk. The camera zooms in on the picture, a watercolour of different species of slugs on grey rocks and a moss-covered twig.
These seem to be slugs?
So they are slugs and semi-slugs.
Semi-slugs, because they've got weird bumps on their back.
Yeah, so slugs and snails are very closely related. In fact, most slugs are more related to other snails than they are to other slugs. So being a slug has evolved probably 5 to 7 times. So And what I mean by that is the reduction of shell. So snails, different snail families have lost their shells several times through different events.
Do they completely lose it?
Not completely. That's the interesting thing. So let's find a slug. So here is one here.
Using his pinky finger, Jon points out a small pale yellow slug with brown spots on a grey rock.
So you can see this kind of, I don't know, this round fingerprint-sized structure here.
Yeah.
This is the shell underneath the skin that presses against the skin. Oh. And in some species, you get called a semi-slug, where the shell has been reduced.
He points out 2 large grey slugs with oval-shaped shells on the moss-covered twig.
But not completely covered.
It's still showing,
so you can still see, and some of them are more snaily than sluggy, so you get one where you get a shell but the animal can't retract into it. But some of them it's just more like a little fingernail on the back, and some of them is completely internal.
He points to a medium-sized light brown slug with a small black oval-shaped shell on a rock.
And you can sometimes find, if you can't find a slug, sometimes you can just find the shell on their own if you're sifting through the soil, or especially in calcium-rich areas.
Right.
But yeah, slugs and snails, they're basically the same thing.
Okay.
Different versions, different species of the same big group.
That's super cool. We've got so many questions coming through. I guess maybe on that sort of note, we've had a question come through from James asking, what in the collection do you think that doesn't get enough attention?
Okay, I'm going to go for another small one.
Yes.
This is actually my favourite snail. Everyone should have a favourite snail.
Jon collects another specimen from the blue table as the pair move back over to the visualizer. He places the specimen under the visualizer camera and zooms in. On a wooden stick, 6 black circles contain tiny light brown spiral shells.
And the reason I think this is quite interesting is, we're very used to looking at the big things around us, but like we're saying, there's 100 species in the UK of mollusks. How many people know that? How many people look at them when they go out in the wildlife? And I think these are just a lovely example. These are tiny. These are about 2.5 millimeters by 2.5 millimeters, only found on the mountaintops of mountains in Borneo. And they're a lovely example of this island evolution. So if you think of something like, Darwin's finches, where, they'd come from a common ancestor, but each finch on each island had evolved a different beak structure due to the different pressures on each island. Yeah. This is the same, but they're not islands of land surrounded by sea. They're the tops of mountains surrounded by uninhabitable lowland vegetation. And each of them has gone under different evolutionary pressures to become different shapes. So you can see in this species, we have a few kind of projections out of the shell and this kind of trumpet-like aperture opening, the mouth of the shell. And what we think is that the pressures of different predators has shaped the forming of these shells through evolution. So these spines are probably defense against predatory slugs, whereas this kind of trumpet-like opening probably stops things like predatory ants going inside and sort of eating the snail from the inside out.
Whoa.
And on each mountaintop, it will be slightly different spines, different shape, different protection, different barriers, all dealing with different combinations of predators.
That's so cool. It's like attachments they've got to fend off whatever's in their habitat. That's super cool. And it's nice because obviously the snail shells come in all sizes and shapes, but like the kind of common kinds that you find in the UK that you might see in parks or gardens, they don't have all these like spikes and what do you say, trumpets and stuff like that.
Yeah, most of our snails are not quite as beautiful as this, but you get some things like the hairy snail, with lovely kind of hairs on it when you look under a magnifying glass. So, I'm very fond of our own native fauna.
Yeah.
People should definitely get out, have a look. There's some beautiful biodiversity.
Definitely. You mentioned with these that they're fending off carnivorous slugs. Now, I've never heard of that before. There are many kind of slugs and snails that are carnivorous.
There's not loads, but there are some. Like most of slugs and snails eat vegetation or decaying vegetation. They're very important for recycling nutrients in the environment. But yes, some are predatory. Actually, do you want to go and have a look at some?
Yeah, let's go for it.
They leave the laboratory and return to the archive full of specimen drawers.
As we're going, we've got obviously more questions that have coming through, more guesses for the mystery specimen as well. Some of the things, it could be a marine snail. Okay. We'll be revealing that in the end, so make sure you stick around. So let's have a look in some of these collections here.
So these are what we call streptaxid snails.
Jon opens 2 wooden drawers full of small rectangular boxes containing snail specimens.
And these are a huge group, kind of tropical across Asia and Africa, carnivorous snail. And these tend to, basically, they rasp away at the shells of other snails. So if you notice a garden snail, I mean, maybe eating your hostas or your lettuces, you might see them kind of rasping off the upper layer of the leaves.
Yeah.
So they have a radula. All snails have a radula, and they're using that usually to break down vegetation. But in these species, they actually rasp away at the shells of other snails in order to get through the shell in order to eat the meat.
That was quite strong then.
Yeah, very strong structures, very sharp. In this group, they're often slightly wonky is the best way to describe them, sort of off-centre. And that's, you can see here, even with the small ones, but in this bigger one, you can see the mouth is at an angle. That's one of the features, and often, and I'm not going to be able to find one because obviously it's,
The camera zooms into a box with a clear lid. In it, several small pale snail shells rest on top of cotton.
I've opened the wrong drawer. They often have these kind of little sort of prongs in the mouth, and that's one of the ways we identify the different species. Counting the kind of what we call teeth in the mouth, looking at the shell shape. And in fact, people are often, my other colleagues that work on non-mollusks, can you believe such a thing? They often quite surprised that most species, new species are described from shells where we can't actually find the living animal. So we may never ever have found the living animal, might not be able to DNA sample it. Yeah. So, for most species, the dry shell is enough for us to distinguish it. Not in all cases. There are cases where the shells of species are too similar, but for the majority of species, and for many species described now, we just use these dry shells using very traditional sort of taxonomy and morphological things, the same as my predecessors were doing 150 years ago, looking at the shell shape, comparing them, looking at the different features and trying to work out if they're a new species.
So these collections are so useful then, because we're looking at specimens, as you said, that may never be found alive. Are mollusks particularly at risk from what's going on currently with climate change, land use change, that sort of thing?
So actually, it's really sad. Terrestrial mollusks, there's been more recorded extinctions in the last 180 years than there has for any other group of animals.
Wow.
Now that doesn't say it represents real life extinction.
Yeah.
One of the, sad benefits of having a hard shell is you can find the animal even though it's not there. Right. For example, Darwin went to St. Helena in the 1830s. And
where is that, an island?
It's an island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean.
Okay,
pretty much slap bang in the middle between South America and Africa.
Okay,
so very remote volcanic island. And he found shells of a species called Chilonopsis, which he believed, and we now think he was right, was already extinct when he landed on the island. But because these hard structures last, you have this record. They're not fossils because they haven't been fossilized. They are the tissue from the shell, but they last, depending on the environment, in the soil, in the mud, under leaf litter for a long time. So you can find these shells even if they may actually have gone extinct.
Right. We've got such an interesting map of where these species are found, even if they're not there anymore, because they leave behind these really quite not iconic, but identifiable shells, right?
Yeah. I mean, people often ask me, like I say, I don't work on marine shells, I'm surprised that a mollusk lives in a seashell. People don't connect sometimes that these shells are produced and an integral part of an animal.
Yeah. I mean, on that point, actually, we had a question through from James. If mollusks can repair their shells, or do they regrow them, or do they live with the damage for the rest of their lives?
So they can repair their shells. So the way they get the calcium is from their environment. So freshwater marine shells take dissolved calcium, different forms of it from the water. Terrestrial, they get it from the soil. So incidentally, in limestone-rich areas, places like Box Hill, where there's a lot of limestone or there's a lot of calcium in the environment, you tend to get a lot more snails, a lot more diversity, and a lot more abundance. And they can repair their shells. So if they've been damaged in a fall or, sort of mauled by a bird or something, as long as the damage isn't too much, they can repair their shell. And you can often see that in the common garden snail, one of the things you might find in your back garden, park, or local green area, compost bin. You'll see these cracks that have been filled in because the shell will probably be a different colour, and you can see where they've had to repair the shell.
That's super cool. Awesome. Well, I guess that's something to look out for then.
Jon closes the two drawers. They walk to the opposite side of the room where Jon opens a cupboard full of wooden drawers.
Can we see some more things in these? I love looking at these cabinets. Is there anything else?
Let's go around this way.
Yeah, sure. I'll follow you around.
So one thing I think is interesting is just the kind of varied amount of research that goes here. And a lot of the things that I'm involved in are sort of traditional taxonomy. So what is a species? What are we going to call them now?
Yeah.
Looking at evolutionary patterns, how we've got sort of the biodiversity that we have around us, and of course the sad extinctions as well.
Yeah.
He pulls out a drawer, turns around and places it on a large brown table.
But there is some more applied research that goes on in the museum. Now, it's not something I do, but these collections are very useful for it. So this is a group of snails called Biomphalaria.
Inside the drawer are more small rectangular boxes containing specimens of a different snail species.
And these are freshwater snails. And weirdly, most freshwater snails are actually more related to terrestrial than they are to marine snails. They have a lung, just like their terrestrial counterparts. But these are an intermediate host for a disease called schistosomiasis, which is a neglected tropical disease that is caused when parasites, these flatworms, go from the intermediate host, which is a snail, and then into humans.
The camera zooms into several boxes with clear lids. Inside are several coiled shells of various sizes. All are different colours. Some are white, some are dark brown, and some are pale brown.
So it normally goes through the skin. So it's often caught by children or people that work in the water a lot. And it's thought to kill, well, we're not quite sure, but it could, tens of thousands of people a year could die of it. It's thought that maybe 200 million people have it. It is curable with a course of medicine, but reinfection occurs as soon as people come into contact with the water. So we have a huge amount of research here, historically and ongoing, looking at not only the parasites here, but also the host, the intermediate hosts, and seeing how people can break these linkages to make sure that maybe it doesn't spread to waterways, removing it from waterways, and helping to understand and inform treatments that could help with new forms of preventative care.
Right, wow. So that's a kind of a great example of some other research going on here at the museum that is having very much real world implications that affect people's everyday lives in some communities.
Yeah. And in fact, I was just noticing that some of these, we use green boxes. You might see these green boxes.
I've never seen those before in the collections we've explored on this show.
So we use green to show that they've been figured or talked about in a scientific paper.
Jon picks up a small open green box and takes out a clear sealed tube containing the specimen.
And these were actually figured in a book by David Brown, who used to work at the museum, on his freshwater snails of Africa. And that's a really pioneering book in understanding the biodiversity of these snails and linking them to the parasites that they hold. So yeah, when we see these, we know that they've been used in an important scientific publication.
He puts the specimen back inside the box and returns it to the drawer on the table.
Wow, that's really great. So we'll definitely keep an eye out for those in other collections that we explore on this show as well. That's fantastic. Let's head back over to that area.
Okay.
Because there were some really cool specimens you had lined up that I think it would be great to get a closer look at. So yeah, if you want to follow me through this way.
They return to the laboratory. Conor points to a large clear jar with a purple-tinged squid preserved in clear spirit on the black countertop.
I had my eyes on that thing over there. I spotted that. I don't know if people in the audience could have seen that. But...
I think it spotted you as well. It's, we do go out on expeditions and collect material, and this is something I collected myself back in 2019. We were on a joint expedition with CFAS and the British Antarctic Survey, actually looking at the waters around St Helena, what we just talked about,
wow, yeah.
and Tristan da Cunha. And this, let me just pop a glove on. This is a wonderful species called the cockeye squid.
Jon dips his latex-gloved hand into the jar and carefully takes out the squid. He holds it over a plastic tray to catch the drips of spirit.
Or the strawberry squid. I'm just going to get it now. And one reason it's called a strawberry squid is you can see it's covered in lights, and these kind of dark bits, they're not strawberry pips, they are lights.
They're lights?
Yeah, so lots of animals in the deep ocean. This probably came from about 750 metres. And lots of animals in the deeper parts of the ocean use lights to communicate or to attract prey.
Yeah.
So this may use it to confuse predators, but also to maybe attract a mate.
Yeah.
Things like that. Or to attract prey by sort of shining these lights, trying to fool into something like it's a shoal of prawns or something.
Yeah, wow, it's absolutely covered in them.
Yeah, and if you see, they have two very different eyes. So they have a normal, if you're a squid eye, with a blue lens.
Yeah.
Using his gloved thumb, he points out the blue lens eye.
And if I turn it round, they have this elongated eye.
Jon turns the squid round. Between his rubber-gloved thumb and index finger, he points out the large, bulging yellow lens eye.
With a yellow lens. If I put it in profile, you can see just how
that is
extended it is.
What?
And it basically has two different eyes because it lives in between two different worlds. Above it is the kind of upper water, and below it is the deep ocean. And
it's like a telescope eye.
It's exactly what it is. So they lie on their side, and this eye acts as a telescope, moving around. And the yellow lens that you can see here is perfectly evolved for looking at the silhouettes of creatures that are sort of backlit against the sunlight that does make it down.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas this sort of smaller eye with a blue lens, that is good at seeing the flashes of bioluminescence produced by other animals. So it's seeing the two different kind of light structures, the no light basically, and the silhouettes above it.
So it's got an eye on both above and below. So it swims on its side?
It swims on its side, yeah. Looking up and down at the same time.
He holds the squid on its side.
Wow, and yeah, I mean, I can imagine it would be confusing for us if we had an eye looking a different direction all the time, but then they're perfectly adapted for that. That's incredible. Wow, I've never seen anything quite like that.
It's kind of cool, isn't it?
That's super cool, yeah, wow.
Jon carefully returns the squid back into the jar.
And do you want to go for, this is another good one. Let me bring this over here. This is...
Jon takes off another lid and lifts a wide, clear jar with another species of squid preserved in clear spirit. He submerges his gloved hand into the jar and carefully takes out the dark grey squid. He holds it over the plastic tray to catch the drips of spirit.
I mean, shows why we use scientific names. So the common name for this is the vampire squid, but it's not actually a squid. It's actually more a type of octopus.
Oh, wow.
And this has my favourite scientific name.
Yeah.
Vampiroteuthis infernalis, which
That's
is
pretty good.
the vampire squid from hell. And these live really deep down, so again, probably over 1,000 metres, living in the oxygen minimum layer. It's the only animal that we've found that constantly lives in this zone. And what I love about it is when they're threatened, well, they move very slowly in their adult life, feeding on marine snow, so all the dead particles from above. But when they're threatened, they squirt out a bioluminescent mucus. That's, you imagine something's chasing it, and in the dark ocean, their eyes are going to be very sensitive. This bioluminescent mucus will sort of hopefully temporarily disrupt their vision, allowing it to slowly blob off in the other direction.
So bioluminescent, so it like flash them?
It produces this slime. It squirts out this glow-in-the-dark slime. It's not ink. They don't have an ink sac.
Right.
But it just produces this trail of glow-in-the-dark mucus.
And so they're like dazzled. They're like, where's it gone?
Exactly, and then this can blob off in the other direction.
And why is it called a vampire?
Well,
from hell.
From hell.
I guess the deep ocean.
The deep ocean.
It could be considered hell
well,
for some
I'm
people.
not sure. It was described by a German scientist called Jon in 1910.
Yeah.
And I wonder if it's possibly because its arms are joined by this kind of web, maybe like a cloak. It's kind of
a bit like a bat swing kind of thing. Yeah.
They don't have fangs.
He holds the squid upside down. The tentacles flop over the squid's body to reveal its mouth.
Oh, it's so black.
But the inside is covered with these little hairs, so maybe they were the kind of Dracula fangs.
Oh, wow.
Jon gently lowers the squid back into the jar and takes off his latex glove.
But yeah, how we name things. Yeah, I mean, with naming things, you can almost name them whatever you like, as long as it's not offensive.
That is incredible. That is amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that one. We had a question from JT actually asking about how ancient are mollusks? Like, how far back do they go in Earth's history?
So they're a really old group. Now, I'm going to say this is not my area.
Okay, no worries.
in the cephalopods, for example, they go back sort of 500 million years. And when you think of things like nautiluses, you can see nautilus fossils that are like 350 million years old, and they look very similar to the species that we have around today. So obviously they have evolved, different species, but they're a kind of their form hasn't changed much because they are so perfectly adapted.
Right.
And the marine mollusks before that have been around a lot longer, so they're a really ancient group. Which is why, if we remember at the beginning, we were saying, you've got a snail on one side and a squid on the other, and because they've been around for these hundreds of millions of years, you've had time for that diversity of form to evolve. Yeah,
that's really cool. So hopefully that answers, but also I'm sure they can find that information on our website as well for those exact dates.
For the paleontologists among you.
We're coming towards the end of the stream. I think it would be good to take another look at the mystery specimen and reveal what that is, and then wrap up with a few more questions. So
they return to the visualizer. Conor removes the previous specimen while Jon positions the mystery specimen beneath the visualizer.
I'll remove this one, pop that over there. And I'll just zoom out a bit. There we go. So there we have it. Just a couple more guesses that came through.
The visualizer camera zooms in and enhances the image of the mystery specimen.
I might need help with pronouncing one of these words. Someone has guessed that it could be a scaphopoda.
Yes, that's a tusk shell that someone else said. That's a scientific name for it. That's a good guess.
That's a great guess. And then we've also had some sort of venom delivery system as well. So that's the guesses we've had through. Can you reveal what a mystery specimen is?
So I think there's some really good guesses there. But no one's got it right. I don't think. This is a love dart.
A love dart?
Yeah, so not all, but some land snail species produce this hard, sort of calcium-based dart arrow that they fire into their partner whilst they're mating. So most terrestrial snails are...
How do they fire it?
Well, so most terrestrial snails are hermaphrodites.
Yeah.
And they mate, most of them sort of face-to-face.
Yes.
So they have a genital opening on the right-hand side.
Yeah.
And they meet, and they exchange sperm to fertilise each other's eggs, sometimes both at the same time, sometimes not. And in some groups of species, at the same time, from the same opening, they push out this hard dart. And it's actually thought it might be where Cupid's arrow comes from, because it only involved in courtship. And for a long time, and still we're not entirely sure why they do it, but studies have shown that when a love dart is produced, because they don't produce them every time they mate, but when a love dart is produced, more offspring are produced by the partner that produces eggs. They're hollow. They have like a kind of hole running through the center. It's thought that maybe there's some kind of secretion, some kind of hormone, proteins or something that they push into their partner, and the arrow is a kind of like a straw linking the two of them, and it allows them to maybe inject some kind of fertility enhancing chemical. Other people have theorized that, you know, it's kind of that competition by making a wound, which can be harmful to
I know that's huge.
Kind of
when you think of a snail, like it's less than a centimetre long, but for a snail, that's
And some
big.
people thought that, you know, that kind of sexual selection through doing something that's disadvantageous. So, you know, if you can survive stabbing, then you're obviously a worthy partner to bear my children.
I don't like that much.
Latest theory is the chemical theory, that it's some kind of hormone or protein that goes in it that increases fertility.
So work is still being done on fully understanding how and why this works.
And not all snails do it, and not all snails that can do it all the time.
That is incredible. Do you know how far it can travel?
It's not like a firing arrow. Okay. It's a next to each other, pushed from one to the other.
Okay, so they kind of like...
Yeah,
like
I guess it's more spear than an arrow.
Yeah.
But it's got a love dart or a love arrow.
I just wanted to pick up on that though, because you mentioned spear. Like, we did have a question through a lot earlier about mollusks using toxins, and then we also had someone ask about a venom delivery system. Do they use a kind of dart spear as well?
So not terrestrial snails. There are groups like the cone shells. So cone shells, famously a toxic group of marine snails. They generally either prey upon fish or worms. And they have that radula we were talking about earlier that snails use for rasping your lettuces. That has been modified in these groups into a venom delivery service, a kind of dart-like structure, not unlike that, which they fire, and they do actually fire them.
That one actually fires.
Into their prey. And that delivers the toxin directly. Wow. And in some species, like Conus geographus, it's actually fatal to humans, the toxin as well.
Right, okay. So where would those be located? Where would people need to keep an eye out for
Australia, tropical, subtropical regions. Yeah. But there's a lot.
Even the snails are dangerous.
Yeah, cone shells exist in lots of different parts of the world.
Right, okay.
Tropical regions.
And if that, so...
Not in Scarborough Beach, it's going to be fine.
Okay, all right. So in the UK, you're fine from cone snails, hopefully. And then, so those can fire. How far can those fire to?
Do you know what? I do not know. That is a good question.
It's all right.
I'm going to try and find out.
Yeah, we can follow up with that on like another episode or on a post afterwards. And just to kind of end on, we've got a nice question. What's your favourite name of any mollusk?
Jon points right.
I mean, I love Vampire Teuthis infernales.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good one. There is a lovely snail. It's a bivalve. And in taxonomy, you have the genus name and the species name. And someone described a genus called Abra. So someone described a species called Cadabra. Sadly, it's been synonymized. It's not valid anymore, but there is an abracadabra snail, so it's pretty awesome.
That's pretty good. Well, thank you so much, Jon. This has been absolutely fascinating. There's so much that we didn't get to as well, so we'd love to kind of get into more of those questions we didn't get round to on a social post as well. But I will let you get back to work. But thank you so much for showing us around.
A pleasure.
Great, thank you.
Jon leaves the laboratory.
And thank you so much for everyone for watching along at home. Once again, I'm really sorry about the technical glitch that we had, but thank you so much for staying with us. Now, our next episode will be out next week, same time, 12:30 p.m. British Summer Time, and we'll be exploring the fossil shark collection with curator Emma Bernard. So that's going to be really, really fun. If you have any questions for Emma about sharks of the past, about sharks in general, please pop those in the chat box, in the comments, or let us know on social media and use the hashtag Hidden Treasures, and we'll get to those. Make sure that you head to our Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok to let us know what you think about the show Hidden Treasures, what you'd like to see more of in the future, or also leave your comment down below in the comment section if you're watching after the fact as well. And as always, if you enjoyed this show, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell notification icon. We've got more episodes of Hidden Treasures for season 2, but also other videos and other content coming, so you don't want to miss any of that. And if you've missed any of the previous episodes from season 1 or season 2, you can find them all in a playlist on our YouTube channel as well, so make sure you catch up. But until next week's show, that's all for now. Thank you very much for joining us, and goodbye.
On the left-hand side, a narrow black rectangle displays the credits. Scientist Jon Ablett, presenter Conor O'Keefe, film Lizzie Tilley, Karma Hawes, Lee Quinn, Duncan Gregory, content and marketing Emily Osterloff, Hannah Reynolds. On the right-hand side, the Natural History Museum logo consisting of the words Natural History Museum, displayed in a column flanked by a large letter N on the left. Text at the bottom reads, "Copyright owned by the trustees of the Natural History Museum, London."